Hi there, I'm Janelle Benjamin, and welcome to another episode of White and Woke at Work. I'm here today with Jonathan Mahan, a sales professional all the way from Colorado, and I'm happy to have him here. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on, Janelle. This is, I'm sure, going to be a fun conversation.
Thanks. I'm just really happy to chat with you today, Jonathan, because as I just found out, you're recently on your journey toward anti-racism, and you're really in the learning phase. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I grew up my whole life knowing racism was wrong and racists were bad and, all people are the same, right? And I kind of thought that was enough. I kind of thought my job, my duty to the world is just to not be actively racist, right? And that was it. And I happily fulfilled that duty and thought that was it, right? And, like many people, it was this summer that I kind of came to the realization of, no, actually, like if anything's going to change, it's going to be because all races are working together on this, right? And in particular, I had another perspective shift of it's not even like I'm pitching in to help the Black population with their problem because I'm a good person. I want to see them see success.
Mm-hmm.
It's more a matter of this is the white population's problem. This is something that was established by white people, over centuries, and that affects white people most heavily,
Yeah.
benefits white people most heavily. This is our problem, our disease, our social issue that we need to clean up. Now, Black people have been helping us and leading the charge for a long time and bringing our attention to it. Otherwise, we never would have noticed it. So thank God and thank you for that Black population doing that. But this isn't like their problem that I'm just lending a hand to. It's like, no, this is my problem. This is my house. This is my disease and issue that I need to clean up. And
Mm-hmm.
thank God they're there to lead us because they know more about it than we do as white people. So
Yeah.
it's very much a perspective shift for me from the way I used to see things.
And you said this shift started in the summer. Was it because of the George Floyd
George
movement and
Floyd and
all?
the accompanying protests, right? And seeing how effective the protests were and seeing how racially mixed the protests were, right, made me realize how much more powerful this movement could be when all races were in on it together.
Mm-hmm.
And then spurred by the protests, right, I did some reading and some learning, of various books on anti-racism. And that's kind of what finished the eye-opening process of, oh no, this is my problem, right? This is my issue to take care of.
What were some of those books that you read?
So the two books were White Fragility was first, and
Mm-hmm.
then the updated edition of Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?
Mm,
The two books, and then just, various, blog posts and stuff, right?
yeah.
Probably one of the best things I did is back in end of July, beginning of August, maybe. I made a post talking about how, if you just look, there's actually a ton of amazing Black female content creators out there
Yeah.
because, previous to 2020, my LinkedIn feed was not very diverse at all.
Mm-hmm.
And, in that post, people started tagging like crazy all the, Black female content creators that they knew. I started connecting with them. And then since then, my feed has been very full of content from Black women. And that's just kind of helped, again, continue the process, right, of opening my eyes and making me realize things I didn't realize before. But yeah, those were the two books I started with.
And what were your, I guess, your biggest takeaways from those books?
White Fragility, of course, really helped me understand, how white power protects itself and how racism has changed,
Mm-hmm.
right? That really opened my eyes to, all the taboos around not talking about race and how that really protects the system as it is, and really how racism has changed, right?
Right.
Because I was raised thinking racism was throwing bricks at Black people on a bus and refusing to let a Black person shop at your store, right? And like this true belief that brown skin made you inferior was what racism was. And it seems like for most people, right, that's gone. That's nothing that really is believed by the majority of our society anymore.
Right.
But what Right Fragility opened my eyes to is how racism has merged and shifted, right, to the more subtle undertones of white normalcy, right,
Mm-hmm.
and white, preference. Um, and then I think just, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting at the Cafeteria is this really, really fairly long and varied book that just covers a whole ton of topics, right? From, teens forming their racial identity, which is where the title comes from, to other topics about being Black in the workplace and interracial marriages and children, and just like all these things, which again, just help open my eyes to, oh shit, there is like life experiences that I've never had before that I can suddenly understand better
Right.
after having read this book, right? So it kind of helped me grow and develop my empathy and my ability to see things from other perspectives reading that book.
I was just last evening. I was reading. I read a white paper by Peggy McIntosh on white privilege and unpacking the invisible knapsack, and I was facilitating a book club discussion on it. And one of the things came up that you just kind of touched on was this sense or this belief that um, white people aren't just inherently good, right? Where you're not taught to believe racism is real, to the norm in society is that, white is good, brown is not. But you're, like you said, the wholehearted belief is not that anymore, that black people are just inherently terrible because of the color of their skin. But yet there's this, like you said, underlying power dynamic that if you're not awoken woken up to it, you can totally live your life absorbing this privilege, absorbing the power at the expense or the detriment of everyone else in society. And it was just a very, very interesting conversation that we had, and that you just kind of touched on. So I'm curious to know, Jonathan, a little bit more, I guess, about your upbringing and what you were taught, I guess, as a child, that and how that changed in the summer of this year. So what was your life like prior to the George Floyd incident?
So I was, raised in a fairly conservative, very Christian home. And again, taught to believe, God made all people equal,
Hmm.
skin color is irrelevant, right? So, to that point, from my parents' side, I think avoided a lot of the, anti-black, pro-white conditioning. My parents were very good about that. And though we lived in a very, very, very white town, they still managed through church connections and stuff, to involve, they had black friends and would have, black kids come over to play with us. And, so we had certain exposure to other races as much as we could in our town. And again, they certainly raised us very clearly to understand that racism's wrong and idiotic, and, God made all people equally, right?
Yeah.
Which again, I thought that was the extent of my responsibility in life, is just not buy into the belief that people of color are inferior in any way. And as long as I don't believe that, I'm good to go.
Right.
But I think, the subtle attitudes that were at work on me, right, was, the unconscious idea of white normalcy, right? How white people are normal and then anyone else is something different, some variation, some abnormality.
Is it
Of
white normalcy or is it white supremacy?
I see those as two separate things, right? Very much related. But one is that white is normal, white is the default, right? White is the color of band-aids, and white people get 1,000 shades of makeup for black people's 5 shades of makeup, right?
Right.
So there's the white normalcy, and then white preference. Because I like to say white preference, because when you say white superiority, it conjures images of the Ku Klux Klan and kind of old school racism.
Right.
Where white preference is just that it's just better to be white. Like, it's okay to be black, but it's
Mhm.
better to be white, right? And that, like, is the preferred mode, and it's just what our society favors, right? And what our society prefers seeing in advertisements, and the characters that our society has an easier time identifying with on screen, and
Mhm.
the color of most children and children's TV shows. Again, it's that combination of preference. It's better to be white, and then it's normal to be white. We're definitely at play.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that I noticed was at play is this conditioned segregation, right? This unconscious otherness. So I went to college at a place that had a really strong Black population. I'd say at least 50% of students were Black.
Mhm.
Um, and I got to admit, I was not the most social guy in college to begin with. And
Where
there were,
was the college?
so it was Morrisville, New York. It was a very small agricultural and technology college.
Mhm.
Um, and I was there in like the natural resource management program. And none of the kids in my degree were Black.
Mhm.
So I guess I have kind of an excuse there. But one way or another, I went through 2 years of that college and never did more than maybe have the briefest of conversations with anyone of color. Like, it was just, again, unspoken, like, there's the Black culture and campus and kids who all hang out together, and there's the white culture and campus and kids who all hang out together. And
Mhm.
if you want to go ahead and make a Black friend, that's okay.
Right.
But it's very much them and us and we hang out with us and they hang out with them. And it wasn't really questioned. Again, I had nothing against the Black
What
people
year
who were.
was this?
This was 2014, I think. Yeah, but no, 2012, 2013, rather.
Wow, just like 7 years ago. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And again, felt no ill will, but it just seemed right and appropriate that I would hang out with my people and that they would hang out with their people. And that just seemed normal in the way of it. And I never really challenged it or questioned it. And I never made any efforts to get past that, right? I was very comfortable accepting that norm, that segregation as normal. And again, just never questioned it, right? It just seemed the way it is,
Yeah.
which I mean, it is the way it is. But now I realize my responsibility, again, is not just to make things worse. My responsibility is actually to make things better, because the way things are is not okay. And it's not going to change if everyone of all races don't work together on it. But in particular, white people have the biggest power and ability to fix this problem, because it's a problem that predominantly our race created and predominantly affects us. So again, I think it's, I'm starting to see it as, again, white person's problem, white culture's problem, white society's problem. Thank God we have Black leaders to help us because we're clueless, but it's fundamentally our problem,
So
which is a very big shift.
what would you do differently, now that you're getting the awareness and the knowledge of things that you could do as an anti-racist to assist this movement for social justice? What would you do differently if you could go back to that campus as a white person, as yourself, and integrate or initiate communication with Black people? What would be different for you?
Hmm. Again, it's hard to say because I didn't have the necessarily the skill set or the confidence back then I have now. Um, Probably, honestly, if I just went to the cafeteria and just saw a Black person sitting alone in the cafeteria, I'd just be like, "Hey, I have no one to sit with. Can I sit with you?" I did that a few times when I first got to campus with white people, of course,
Right.
and made a few friends out of it, right? And then I just, once I had a couple of friends, I was like, "Okay, it's good enough. I won't do that anymore."
Mhm.
So I'd probably do that more. I probably, make an effort to get involved in some of the campus events, right, where I could meet people outside my major. I was unfortunately too content to just only know people in my major and leave it at that. Or if I'd gone to different events.
So what was inhibiting you before? Was there a fear? Like you said, there's an othering of the Black group on campus. Was there like a fear of, if I reach out, I might be rejected? Or it was just, I'm white, I should be with my own kind? Like, what was going on there, I guess?
Um,
And I'm probing this, I'll tell you why. Because I think it's really important, even today, we don't see a lot of intermixing, right? We in
mhm,
the book club discussion last night, it came up that as much as the people on the Zoom call were our white allies, how many of them had really invited a Black friend over for dinner? How many of them had ever attended a Black person's christening? you know Things like that. We're not ingratiating ourselves into each other's lives in a meaningful way. So I'm kind of staying there with you a little bit, because I do want to unpack that and figure out, for the viewers, what steps do we need to actually take to cross those color lines? Because you can be awaken, I don't even know the right word, awaken to all these issues, um, and still not have the confidence to cross
yeah.
that color line, right? It really does, like you said, it takes a little bit of a boldness and a comfort. Um, so what can we do to change that so that people do feel a lot more comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, part of it, right, is probably not an interesting answer. It's just a matter of, I wasn't the most confident or social person then, anyways. So my default was to not talk to people, and I needed a reason beyond the default to like build a relationship with someone, right?
Right.
So in the absence of some extra special reason for us to know each other, I generally just was happy to not know anyone at the
Mhm.
time. But I think another element too that may have, stunted even the minor efforts I would have put into it is a um, a feeling that I had nothing in common with them and thus would have no common ground for conversation. And thus any sort of interaction between us would just be awkward, right?
Right.
Because not only was there a racial difference, but there was a real cultural difference. In that particular college, I think, I don't know, but I imagine, at least 80, 90% of the Black population at that college had come directly from New York City. And I came from like, rural upstate New York, and the culture in Black New York City and white rural New York are cultures that don't share a lot. So I couldn't talk to them about the media they consume, the TV shows, the movies, the characters, the life experiences.
Yeah.
I didn't share any of that with them, right? I was interested in like hiking the outdoors, learning about animals and trees because I was in a natural resource program.
Hmm.
So it felt like there was just no common ground.
Yep.
So you combine no common ground, cultural differences with kind of being shy, awkward, introverted anyways. I felt like even if I did go sit down with a Black person at lunch, we would have nothing to talk about, and that would just be painfully awkward. And I
Yeah.
was afraid of painfully awkward conversations, right? I didn't have the
Yeah.
boldness and confidence to sit through an awkward conversation. I avoided awkwardness at all costs.
And I think, you're raising something else that's really, really important about culture and the culture of our activities, right? The things that we do in our free time that define who we are, um, as groups of people, right? And it's sort of, I don't know if it's a natural thing or if it's just that blacks have been relegated in society to doing certain things. But stereotypically, we're not golfing, we're not hiking, we're not, um, you know, I don't know what else, skydiving and parasailing and white activities, right? We
Yeah,
there are the one-offs, right? I'm sure there's lots of black golfers. There's Tiger Woods, right? There are we're certainly crossing the color lines in every major sport activity, and there's black people, of course, that love hiking. I can just imagine people saying, don't say that. But for the
sure.
most part, right, the stereotypical black person isn't doing those things. And so you're right,
Yep.
it's very difficult for conversations or for engagement with groups that you, like you said, you may not necessarily have anything in common with, right? And I think it speaks to sometimes the awkwardness that blacks also have when they go into white spaces, and they don't necessarily, they have to they have to fake it till they make it, right? They start code switching and pretending that they can discuss the cottages and the golfing and the
Yeah.
tennis when we really don't know anything about that life. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I remember working at a law firm, and the senior partner, he's was an avid squash player, right? So I had to pretend that yes, of course I could, I've got great hand-eye coordination. I've played basketball for many years. So I thought, how hard could it be? I took a little bit of tennis when I was a kid. I'm going to be able to hit that squash
Yeah.
ball. And I couldn't return the ball at all. It was just flying so fast, bouncing off the side. I went to this country club or wherever we were, this fancy place, and I just totally humiliated myself. And they knew immediately that I couldn't fit in, and I was never invited back to the squash club. And it just became this activity that most of the guys in the firm, they did. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it just really, you're right. It's difficult for whites and blacks to find that common ground when it is that we don't have similar activities. And you're right. If it's going to compound things if you're awkward and you're shy at the same time. So
Yeah.
it isn't that you were, overtly racist or shying away. It's just, the uncomfortableness of
Yeah.
how do we cross over? How do we relate to one another as human beings? And you also raised a really important thing, and I think you talked about, just music and movies, and finding that common ground through acquired learning, right? Because it's very easy to watch movies, and you're raising so many things I touched on last night. It's just, what do we have in our environments? What movies are we watching, right? What art's on our walls? Who's the artist, right? Just what books are on our shelves and who's the author. Like, if everything that we're immersing ourselves with are have white faces, then we're not going to understand the other, right? And it applies across individuals. It applies, depending on, no matter what the culture is, not just black culture, but it applies to newcomers from different populations as well. Just understanding who's the other, right? The
Yeah.
foreigner, um, through the things that they identify with in the culture, right? In arts, in literature, music, etc.
Well, and it's interesting too, right? You just brought something to my mind, which always blows me away, the things that my mind doesn't notice, it doesn't think of, such simple things. I described how I felt, uncomfortable and awkward, the idea of, going to get to know the Black people on campus, because again, we'd have so little in common. It would be so awkward. For me, I have the very easy option to just not, right? There is so much freaking white culture, white companies, white colleagues, white professors, white everything around me. I can very easily just you know, integrate myself into that community and never really have to go through that uncomfortable process of having to like find a way to get along and relate to, a majority black population. I've
Right.
literally never in my life been forced to go through that. Like I've always had the very easy and available option of just integrating myself with white culture because it's simpler and less awkward.
Yeah.
I didn't totally realize that black people probably feel the exact same way, but in very, very many settings, they don't have the option, right, to only integrate themselves in black culture.
Right.
So many people have to, you know, make that hard decision and say, okay, well, I want to work in this field, so I'm going to have to go work in an office place, where I'm going to be one of two black people. And I'm just going to have to learn how to fit in with that white culture. And again, I've certainly, heard of and been aware of code switching, but I hadn't quite made the connection of how I felt in college is, how a lot of black people feel in the workplace. But
Yeah.
the difference was, again, I didn't have to sit in that uncomfortableness. I could very easily just decline and do what's easier.
So you never in your life been in a situation where you were the minority in the room?
I mean, last week I got my hair cut at a barbershop. It was like all black people working at the barbershop, and I was the
Yeah.
only white person. But like, barring brief minor moments like that,
How does
no.
that feel for you? You go into a black barber shop. What's the feeling?
I didn't feel a ton very strongly. In general, I have a very, I don't know, I could just turn off. My wife always accused me of being very socially unaware and not feeling much of anything when I'm out in public.
Mhm.
But it did feel a little bit like other, right? I was like, oh, I'm the only one. Okay. And then I wondered, am I supposed to be here?
Yeah.
Do they only do black people hair? On their website, they did have one white guy in the photo. So I know they at least, could cut one white person's hair before.
Yeah.
But I was like, am I supposed to be here? And they look at me like, is this guy lost? What are they thinking? Right? What are they thinking when they see me walk in?
Right.
Um, I
And
don't
how's
know.
the conversations? Are you like a fly on the wall? Are you really like relating to them? Are you partaking in the conversations with the barbers? And
So I'm generally the silent one anyways. I don't make a ton of conversation with barbers. And normally that's okay, right? Normally I just show up, get my damn haircut and leave.
yeah.
Um, but this time I did feel like, should I be talking? I probably should be talking. If I'm silent, then it just makes this extra awkward. I should probably find something to talk about. Oh, what the hell did I talk about? And I tried listening to their conversations. And
Yeah.
again, I have no idea what they were talking about, couldn't chime in, couldn't relate. There was just nothing there. So I did make a little small talk, but
So how are you then going to take your anti-racist knowledge, I guess, and apply it in real life if it's really awkward or uncomfortable, I guess, to even relate to conversations in a barbershop? What are you going to do, Jonathan? We need people like you to be able to connect with us and change things for us, but also, to welcome us and to be cordial and collegial and friendly and all of that with us. So what are we gonna do? What are you gonna
I
do?
don't know if I have a great answer to that, right? Other than just like be more willing to
Yeah,
sit through the awkwardness, right? Like just knowing that it's important and it's worth being awkward for.
yeah.
But
Well, you're still on a journey of learning, which is really admirable. So I'm curious, we talked a little bit about your personal life, but what are you doing, I guess, in your work life? You're a sales professional, but what does the office setting look like for you? Are you in an office? Are you on the road? Like how do you handle your business, and are you interacting with people of different groups on a daily basis?
well, this is my office environment.
Okay.
I'm in a
Everybody's now
yeah, I'm in
corporate
a
life,
fully work from home role right now.
right?
I guess professionally, handful of things, right? Part of it is I see a large part of my responsibility in my anti-racist work in the area of dealing with white people, educating white people, talking to white people, helping white people understand, helping white people communicate, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I feel like that's a lot of what I'm called to do, right? To kind of be that interpreter, that middle ground to help,
Mhm.
which involves me interacting much more with white people, right? Taking what I learn, from the black activists who've been doing this a long time.
Mhm.
I've started to become a little bit more aware, right, of when I'm like, finding guests for my podcasts and finding people to co-create content with, right? Again, this white normalcy and white preference, unconscious bias
Yeah.
tends, oftentimes when I see a white person who's accomplished, immediately it springs to my mind, they'd be a great podcast guest. Or sometimes when I see a Black person who's accomplished, it just doesn't quite jump to my mind as easily. Or conversely, when I'm sitting there going, ooh, here's a cool topic we could do a podcast on. Who do I know?
Mhm.
Instantly my head is filled with white people. And I
Yeah.
have to just make that extra effort to say, okay, great. Do I know any people of color as well? And oftentimes I find people who would also be great and sometimes even better for that topic. And I'm like, wow, why did that not come to my mind at first? Right?
Right.
Why did I have to take that extra step to ask myself, do I know any people of color who could cover this topic? Because again, my brain is just trained when thinking of experts and professionals and people who are knowledgeable and could add value. It's just all whiteness that comes to mind. Right. So
Mhm.
I'm on that personal journey of just taking that extra step when I'm thinking of who should my guests be, to ask myself, great, all these white people my brain came up with would be great options. Do I know any people of color who would also be great options? And again, sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes the answer is yes, but just going through that simple extra step has led to having a nice, more even mix, right? Because again, I think a big part of, you know, ending this white preference and white normalcy stereotype is just to see more Black faces in more settings, particularly in professional settings, showing up as experts, right?
Yeah.
That kind of jars with the stereotypes of Black people. So I'm doing a bit of that. Similarly, now that I'm at this company that's brand new and I'm remote and I don't know anybody, I'm like 2 to 3 people per week. I'll just set up a little social Zoom call for.
Mhm.
And again, I'm just watching myself to make sure those aren't all white people, right? Because again, it's just this subtle thing that when I scroll through a list of names and one name sounds like ethnic as fuck and one name is Jessica, right?
Yeah.
The first person my brain's like, ooh, we should send her a message and see if she wants to meet up for lunch is the Jessica.
Yeah.
Like my brain is just seeks out those names. So now I'm kind of trying to retrain that. And when I see a name that sounds ethnic, I go, oh, well, let's make sure they make it on the list at some point, right? To kind of counterbalance, because that's what I think, right? I think all of our responsibilities with everything, right? Whether it's race or, gender equality or, sexual equality, whatever. I think what we need to do is just identify what biases are acting against us and
Yes.
put some little process in place to counteract that bias, right?
Yeah.
Some little extra step to make up for that.
Yeah, we all have them. I think, it's partly biases, but it's also it's just human, right? To gravitate toward people who are like ourselves.
Sure.
If I think they've done studies where, you walk onto a crowded bus, there's, a couple empty seats here, a couple empty seats there, there's a man, a woman, who are you going to go sit beside? Or you're going to sit beside the person who looks closest to you
Yeah.
always, right? Whether it's, if there's a bus full of women and there's one man there, you're going to go sit beside the man, right?
Yeah.
Even if he's of a different color or race, you're because he's male like you. And so it's just partly human, I think. And it's sort of like, how do we get around that human nature to just, be with people that are like ourselves and to stop othering other
Oh,
people.
yeah. And
That's
that goes on so many lines, right? I know it's the same thing with age. Again, walk into a crowded room, I'm going to go find the person who's in their 20s and talk to them or sit by them and not
yeah,
the people in their 40s or 50s, right?
right.
Happens the same thing with age, probably, certainly happens with race, certainly happens with gender. It's harder to tell on the surface sometimes, but it certainly happens with like political affiliations as well, right?
Mhm.
Like I'll certainly, if I get the sense someone's a little bit leftist or progressive leaning, I'll go talk to them. If I get the sense somebody's more conservative or right leaning, I'll avoid them.
Yeah.
I think it probably just stems, again, everyone's scared of awkwardness and everyone wants conversation to be easy and natural. And
Mhm.
in general, we have easier, more natural conversations with people who are our gender, our age, our race, our political affiliation. So we just kind of go for the easy option, right? Because again, we're also scared of awkwardness. We're also scared of awkward silences and difficult conversation. We just go for whatever's easier, which unfortunately perpetuates this. So I guess to kind of circle back on one of your earlier questions, right, of what can I do?
Yeah.
On all these lines, I think I can just get more comfortable with awkward conversation, right? Or be more willing to risk awkward conversation, right?
Mhm.
Be more willing to engage with people, right, who aren't like me.
I think you're doing a
Again,
good job so far. You're doing a
yeah,
great
all
job so
right.
far. I mean,
You
you're
didn't see me in that barber shop. That was I couldn't make conversation with anybody.
but at least in your work life, you're at least considering the skills and the abilities of people other than yourself, which is critically important to increase representation, as you said, of professionals in different environments and different sectors. So I appreciate
Yeah.
that, that you're doing that. And what's next for you on your plate? What's coming down the pike? I know we're still in this virtual COVID world, but assuming things go back to normal in 2021, what will you be doing? What will that year look like for you?
Mm. I certainly will continue, being active on LinkedIn. In particular, I have, a content series that I want to do, which again is geared towards a little bit geared more towards white people, of
Hmm.
helping white people understand, helping woke white people have better, more productive conversations with their friends and family who maybe aren't on board and don't see racism, right?
Right. Hmm.
Personally, I see one of the biggest issues that faces us on all fronts, but certainly on the race front, is that the people who are causing the problems, or the people who are at least not helping fix the problems, right? The communication
Hmm.
between, woke white people, allies, we're going to call us, and, for lack of a better term, we'll call them the more conservative right-winged branch of society. The
Hmm.
communication is almost non-existent. Like, it's such an awkward topic. We just don't talk about it. The only people progressives talk about race with is other progressives. And the only people conservatives talk about race with is other conservatives.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is we get to this point where each group strongly disagrees with the other group, but what they're disagreeing with and what they're taking issue with isn't what the other group actually thinks.
Right.
It's what we think they think, right? So I am strongly opposed to what I think conservative people feel about racism.
Right.
And I attack what I think conservative people feel about racism. And I create arguments against what I think conservative people think about racism. But truthfully, I haven't talked to enough conservative people to know, is that actually what most conservative people think about racism, right? I see this all the time where, someone will post something, and of course I see it better than reverse. What I see is conservative people posting something which is like a counter argument to a
Hmm.
leftist belief. And I'm like, the left doesn't believe that. What the fuck are you talking about? Yeah, that's a rock solid argument. You're totally right. If the left actually believed that, your argument would be rock solid, but nobody on the left actually believes that. And
Right.
I imagine it's the same on the right? Where again, each group isn't fighting against what the other one actually believes.
Hmm.
We're fighting against what we think the other group believes based on the memes we see and the news we see, but there isn't actually enough communication
I
for
do
us to
feel
realize
though
what we
like
actually disagree with each other on.
I do feel like though in certain cases, at least when we had a lot more face-to-face interaction, there would be these awkward moments where, somebody progressive is hearing the racist rhetoric of somebody
Mhm.
on the further on the right, and then they didn't know what to say, right?
Oh
They
yeah.
they didn't have the tools in their arsenal to, clap back and say, okay, that's not okay, or don't say that around me, or correct them on their beliefs. So you're right. I think online it's a lot different. But in the face-to-face interactions, it's like I think a lot more people now are developing, like you said, they're learning what to do or how to counteract those instances. At least that's what I would hope, to refute those racist views, and kind of change things, right? It's those microaggressions that Black people experience them all over, right, in
Mhm.
all facets of our lives, but white people experiencing them among other with other whites is very interesting as well, where it's like, you hear it, you cringe, you don't want, it's like, I don't want to be part of this, but you're in a, you're at a dinner table, you're wherever, and these horrible viewpoints just start to come out, whether they're sexist or racist or whatever, what have you. And it's in those moments, I think, that anti-racists like yourselves are going to have to stretch themselves to do something different, right? It's one thing to be progressive and have those views and then keep quiet, but now that it's, do you have the tools to interject and correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it comes down to, people being afraid of awkwardness, right?
Yeah.
So I think I probably, as I briefly mentioned earlier, I think I feel stuff like that less than other people, right? My wife is very attuned to social situations, social pressures, social awkwardness, social faux pas, and I just miss all of that. I'm just kind of like a little clueless on that front.
Yeah.
So I'm more easily able to have awkward, uncomfortable conversations than other people. So I almost feel like it's kind of my responsibility to use that uniqueness about myself
Mm-hmm.
to do that, right? And to show people how it can be done, show people how these conversations can be had.
Yeah.
Because again, problem we run number one run into is that these conversations aren't happening between progressives and conservatives about race. It's just not happening. Problem number two is when it does happen, it's not productive at all.
Right.
Like there's no empathy, there's no curiosity, there's
Mhm.
accusation, there's hurt feelings, there's anger, there's frustration, and like that's just not it. So um
Yeah,
yeah,
Anthony
I'm not quite
Shiflett
sure
was on.
exactly.
Anthony Shiflett was on, and he was talking about how he's just not tactful at all. He just like lashes them, like he can't deal.
Yeah. Well, so here's another thing, right? Talk about my responsibilities. So I can more easily weather awkwardness than other people can. Just my neurological makeup. I don't sense those things the way other people sense them. So there's
Right.
one reason that I feel like I have responsibility to use that power to help. Also, with my background in sales, I've had to learn how to become very good at leading with empathy and curiosity, right?
Mhm.
So again, I have an ability of empathy and curiosity a lot of people don't have that I need to use. But the other thing I've found is that for progress to take place, for people on the right to realize what's going on, for their eyes to be opened,
Mhm.
you need patience, you need empathy, you need respect, you need all these things, right? Telling them the straight truth about you're causing the problem and that's bullshit, you shouldn't say that. It's true as it is, it doesn't actually help.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, for most Black people, there's so much stress, pain, and trauma tied up around the area of race. I don't think it's realistic or fair to require Black people to behave that way when they talk about race with white people. If they can manage it, great. But there's so much pain, trauma, and stress tied up in the topic, it's not always possible.
Yeah.
For me, though, there is no pain, stress, or trauma tied up in the topic of race. I don't have any baggage that I carry around involving race, right? So
Yeah.
for me, I have the ability, even if I don't want to, I do always have the ability to show up in conversations about race and use patience, kindness, empathy in a way that some Black people literally just can't because there's so much, pain tied up in the topic.
It's true.
So you take those three things, right? And I feel like I have the perfect set of traits to be able to have these conversations that other people can't have and to be able to do this and kind of lead the way and show people how it can be done.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of my big responsibilities. So again, I'm trying to figure out exactly what that looks like,
You're
but I
talking
know
about
that's the direction I'm
traits.
headed.
You're talking about having traits though, and I'm just wondering, is there a trait within white people that makes some progressive and have the empathy and others just never will? Or is it possible that all white people can be progressive, that some are just in this cloud of privilege, they don't understand, and then they can wake up to what the realities are for other people, people that don't look like them.
Um, I don't think all white people could ever be truly progressive because, in my mind, my observation, what it takes or what's most common in people who are really progressive is a combination of curiosity, empathy, and imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the ability to imagine, okay, well, this is my experience. My entire life, this has been my worldview. But what if it was different? Right?
Yeah.
What if I was in someone else's shoes? What would that feel like? What would that look like? And what if, right? Because a lot of times I'll hear different things and I'll have resistance to them. Like, no, that's wrong. But I have to temporarily suspend my current operating system and try to adopt the operating system, the worldview of another to
Mm-hmm.
see what that would be like. So yeah, curiosity, imagination, empathy. I think that's what it takes, especially in the area of race, but really any issue, to kind of have a more progressive standpoint, right? A lot of people are very grounded in their experience and their reality and what they've seen,
Mm-hmm.
and they can't really shed that.
Yep. Yep.
So when you can't shed that, everything you hear just doesn't make sense, right? When you hear Black people talk about these things, you're like, what are you talking about? That hasn't been my experience.
Right.
Now, empathy, curiosity, imagination can be cultivated and developed if you make a priority of it. But it's one of those things where people without it don't realize they need it and probably won't make a priority of it.
Yeah.
But like most things, right? I'm not setting out to change the extremists. I'm setting out to change that middle, right?
Yeah.
That middle group of people who have some curiosity, empathy, and imagination. And if they just bent that towards the topic of race, then they could actually, see the light. And
And
again,
that's the thing, because you're right. I can just imagine some people who are on the further right listening to this and feeling offended. What do you mean I'm not imaginative? I'm not curious. Just because I don't believe blah, 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 doesn't mean that I'm not, what have you, right? But you're right, it's not them that are really going to be swayed over. It's really those the people who are close. They're just in that middle ground. The light bulb can perhaps turn on, and that's who I'm hoping to speak to through this series. So I thank you so much for coming on, Jonathan, and sharing your
Yeah.
story with us today. I think it's really gonna inspire a lot of people who are in that middle ground to wake up to the this movement for social justice and participate in it. And hopefully they'll take some of your suggestions and read some of those books, and maybe check out some Black movies, and head to the
Yeah.
barbershops. Head to the barbershop so that they can they can feel a lot more comfortable in spaces that they're not necessarily always familiar with. So again, thank you for coming on. And if anybody needs to reach Jonathan, he's available at Jonathan Mahan at on LinkedIn, and you can reach me at on LinkedIn as Janelle Benjamin, or on Twitter as on JB_Equitable, or at allthingsequitable.ca. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time on another episode of White and Woke at Work.
Thanks for having me on, Janelle.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.